The commentator introduced Shea Hart before introducing his opponent, Quill, a Kimyo fighter with 15 wins and 4 losses from Salt Lake Gym. He announced the fight as Human versus Kimyo and joked that fights like this were rare for medical reasons. He also reminded the crowd that Shea's 3 previous wins looked promising. Once the fight began, Quill warned that there was no room for pity inside the arena before telling Shea to come closer. Quill's muscle fibers could stretch through their natural elasticity, allowing them to protrude from his body as barbs. By flexing his muscles, he hardened the skin covering them, creating razor-sharp quills. Quill threw a right punch, but Shea blocked it. The commentator shouted that the fight was finally underway and said he would not want to be on the receiving end of a Kimyo punch. Quill immediately followed with a high kick toward Shea's head. Quill mocked Shea for spending the entire fight defending and challenged him to attack. He stepped in, ducked underneath, and landed an uppercut, but Quill raised his quills and blocked it. Quill asked if that was all Shea had. Shea called him a cheeky bastard. Shea realized Quill could produce quills on any part of his body at will, making him extremely difficult for a human to attack. However, because Quill was not permanently covered in quills, the ability clearly had a time limit. Shea estimated Quill could only maintain it for 30 to 60 seconds. Quill admitted the deduction was correct. Flexing for too long caused muscle cramps, and he could only produce quills on one area of his body at a time. With that, he challenged Shea to attack again. Realizing he was being baited for a second time, Shea accepted the challenge. He began using unusual footwork, making it impossible to predict where he would attack or where Quill should place his quills. Shea closed the distance and started landing light taps instead of full punches. The spectators realized he was doing it on purpose because delaying the withdrawal of his fist would leave it impaled by Quill's spikes. Shea then leaped into the air as if attempting a flying kick. Quill covered his forearms with quills, believing Shea could not change his trajectory in midair. At the last second, Shea pulled his leg back. The kick had only been a feint. He dropped low and drove a straight right into Quill's stomach. He then raised his left toward Quill's face before smirking and driving another right into Quill's stomach instead. Refusing to lose again, Quill stabbed through Shea's fingers with his quills. Still smiling, Shea revealed that Quill had taken the bait. Since Quill could not produce quills on 2 areas at once, his jaw had been left completely exposed. Shea finished the fight with a left hook to Quill's jaw, knocking him unconscious. An hour after the fight, Shea was cleaning himself up in the bathroom while the announcer could still be heard outside. The commentator hyped up the previous match, saying the Human versus Kimyo fight had been insane and praising Shea's performance before introducing the next fight between Balrog of South and Ramsey of Curip. The bathroom door creaked open as 2 men walked inside and called out Shea's name. They told him he had messed up because they had bet a lot of money on him losing. Since he had won, they now had a major problem. They gave him a simple choice: hand over every cent he had earned that night, and they would let him walk away. They warned him not to play the hero since Quill had already left him covered in injuries. Shea calmly told them to close the door before they started. One of the men pulled out a knife, but Shea quickly dealt with both of them. Later, Shea walked to the reception desk, where Demalia was talking excitedly about how cute he was and how amazing he had fought. Shea greeted her, and Demalia praised his performance even more, saying the scratches only made him look hotter. Shea thanked her. Demalia reminded him that the arena hosted a party after every monthly competition, but despite competing regularly, he never attended. She teased him for never making time for her either. Shea apologized, saying he had things to do at home. Demalia handed him his prize money before joking that if he ever got cold, he knew where to find her. Shea acknowledged her before asking her to inform management that there were 2 injured men lying in his changing room. He claimed he had no idea how they ended up there. Later that night, Shea stepped into his bathtub. As the hot water touched his wounds, pain shot through his body. He reminded himself that everything he was enduring had better not be in vain. The following morning, Tevin's girlfriend complained that Shea was late again and joked that he must have a woman inside his apartment. Tevin disagreed, saying no woman could stand Shea for more than a day. From inside, Shay sarcastically asked them to speak louder instead of yelling outside his apartment at 6 in the morning. Tevin reminded Shay that they had known each other for 15 years, yet nobody had ever been inside his apartment. He joked that Shay must be selling drugs because his grandmother needed Advil. Tevin's girlfriend told Shay to hurry up and get in the car before they were late. After arriving, Shay looked up at the sign reading Red Ember Gym. He asked if they would be back at 4, while Tevin thanked his girlfriend for the ride. Shay explained that Red Ember Gym was his dojo. Many of his fellow students came from difficult backgrounds. He introduced the elderly man training everyone as his master, Leo Thomas, a war hero. 61 years earlier, the threat Kimyos posed to humanity had sparked a war between humans and Kimyos. Countless innocent lives had been lost, though that story would come later. To Shay, Master Leo was like a father. He treated every student like one of his own sons. As the students trained, Leo explained that having speed as a talent meant nothing if it was used predictably. He effortlessly caught Azum's sneak attack before launching into another lesson. Each fighter possessed talents unique to their own personality. Failing to maximize those unique strengths would make them no different from ordinary human fighters. They had to use the gifts that made them unique or lose them altogether. Leo demonstrated every point by repeatedly overwhelming Azum before finally sending him crashing to the ground. Tevin joked that once Master Leo saw Shay's battered face, it would be hilarious watching him get beaten for fighting again. Shay fired back by calling Tevin a man-child who still let his girlfriend drive him around. Leo ignored the banter and ordered Azum to get back up for another round. One of Shay's classmates joked that Azum had volunteered to go first, while another pitted him and said he had once had a bright future. They also warned Shay that Master Leo wanted to have a word with him, and judging by the injuries on his face, it looked like he had fought another underground match. After finishing with Azum, Leo dismissed him and called Shay forward. Tevin quietly reminded Shay that he still remembered being called a man-child. Shay nervously approached his master. Leo immediately scolded him for fighting behind his back after being specifically forbidden from entering underground matches. He reminded Shay that he was only human and asked what would happen if he faced someone stronger than himself. Looking at Shay's injuries, Leo admitted he could not bear to lose another son before slapping him across the face. He questioned why an underground fighter had let his guard down before preparing to continue the lecture. Before he could, a man walked in clapping and laughing. He asked Leo why he looked so serious before announcing that he had probably never expected to see him again. The newcomer was Rokash Rampersad, one of Trinidad's biggest names. He had recently entered the world's top 150 documented Kimyos. The achievement had only inflated his ego, and his arrogance had made him one of the most hated men in the country. Rokash casually greeted everyone as he walked in. One of the students asked if Master Leo really knew the man standing in front of them. He pointed out that nobody was allowed inside the dojo during training and mocked Rokash for apparently being unable to read the sign. Leo immediately told Rokash he was not welcome there. Rokash laughed and asked if that was really how his favorite teacher greeted a former student. Another student stepped forward and repeated Leo's order to leave before asking if Rokash had gone deaf. Rokash smiled and asked if they wanted to spar. Leo put an end to it before it could escalate. This was no longer Rokash's home. He ordered him to leave immediately. Rokash replied that Leo spoke as if he stood at the pinnacle of Kimyo strength despite having no idea what true power was. Before leaving, he promised Leo would acknowledge his strength before he died, warning that day might come sooner than expected. After Rokash left, Shay asked if Leo was all right and questioned who Rokash thought he was for threatening him. Leo sighed before explaining that Rokash had once been one of his students. His arrogance had always stopped him from reaching his full potential, but despite that flaw, he had also been one of the strongest students Leo had ever trained. Back then, the dojo had only 4 students. Rokash constantly challenged the others because he was obsessed with proving his own strength. The real problem was that he never understood the responsibility that came with fighting. Whenever he fought, the animalistic side of his talent took over, and he treated every battle like a game. One day, without Leo's knowledge, Rokash challenged another talented Kimio named Jacob. The match should never have happened. Whatever Rokash had wanted to prove, the fight ended with Jacob dead. An investigation followed, but the authorities ruled it unintentional homicide. After being cleared, Rokash left the dojo and never returned. The students were shocked that he had gotten away with killing someone. One of them declared that if Rokash ever returned, he would beat him himself. Leo laughed at the threat, calling him his little human boy. The student laughed it off, saying that this time Leo had all of his students behind him. Leo ended the conversation and told everyone to leave. He would finish cleaning the dojo himself while they attended to their usual responsibilities. Later, Shay arrived at Dr. Evan's clinic. The two greeted each other warmly before Evan mentioned that work had become much busier lately because treating injured Kimios was basically dealing with bar fights every day. He also proudly shared that his daughter Juliana was expecting her sixth child. After the brief conversation, Evan examined Shay. He refilled all of Shay's usual prescriptions and added amoxicillin to help with the internal bleeding. The medication was to be taken once a day. Evan explained that while he could continue supplying the medication Shay needed, he could not stop him from making dangerous choices outside the clinic. Shay's body was far tougher than an average human, most likely because of his ability, but Evan admitted he was still lucky to be alive. He warned Shay that he could not hide his condition from his friends and family forever. Eventually, the pain would reveal itself. Shay's latest test results had not improved. His bruised lung still had not healed. Both clavicles and a shoulder socket remained fractured. Severe muscle and tissue scarring covered his body. There was nerve damage in his right hand, damage to his left optic nerve, a chipped rib, screws holding together his ankle, and the internal bleeding still had not stopped. Evan asked whether the underground fighting money was really worth destroying his body. Shay was pushing himself beyond his limits, and every fight shortened his life even further. Shay thanked Evan for worrying about him, but insisted he still had plenty left in him. He explained that the money was going toward a good cause and reminded Evan that he had already admitted he was unusually tough for a human. Evan finally gave in and told Shay to let him know if he ever needed anything. Shay thanked him before joking that Evan looked healthy and asking if his wife still had him doing yoga. Evan laughed, insisting it was a far manlier form of exercise before telling Shay to take care of himself so he could grow old. After leaving the clinic, Shay admitted he felt guilty for leaving Leo alone at the dojo after Rokash had threatened him. Tevin reminded Shay that Rokash might be rich, but that did not give him the right to threaten the man who had raised him. Shay agreed and decided he would check on Leo first thing the next morning. Tevin reassured him that Leo was like a father to him and would be fine before asking if they could finally leave. A deafening explosion echoed through Red Ember Gym. Within moments, the dojo was engulfed in flames. As smoke filled the building, Leo Thomas and Rokash stood facing one another, while Rokash's nephew, Cass, remained nearby. The two had planned an ambush. Leo had already been shot. Feeling the wound, Leo couldn't help but think that age had finally caught up to him. Years ago, he would have dodged a bullet with ease. Rokash turned furiously toward Cass. He demanded to know where the gun had come from and reminded him that Leo was his to finish. Cass had nearly robbed him of that satisfaction. Caught off guard, Cass could only stammer that he thought he was helping. Before anyone could react, Rokash shouted a warning. Leo had already moved. He launched himself toward Cass and unleashed Phoenix Spear. The devastating strike sent Cass crashing across the dojo. Leo turned his attention back to Rokash. He asked if this was truly how Rokash had chosen to raise his own nephew. After everything, did Rokash understand nothing about responsibility? Rokash scoffed. He argued that Leo had no right to lecture him about responsibility. It was Rokash who had put the failed dojo on the map. No student who had ever trained there had surpassed him. Even Jacob had been nowhere near his level. If Jacob couldn't handle the challenge, then he never should have accepted the fight. Leo's expression hardened. He warned Rokash never to speak Jacob's name again. The gunshot wound continued to weaken him. Leo admitted that the injury would likely kill him, but what hurt him more was seeing the monster Rokash had become. Despite everything he had taught him, Rokash had abandoned all reason and passed that same twisted mindset onto his nephew. Looking directly at his former student, Leo reached a final decision. Tonight, he would correct his greatest mistake. Rokash challenged Leo to come at him. Despite his age and injuries, Leo burst forward and drove a knee toward Rokash's face. Rokash blocked the strike, but Leo kept the pressure on with a relentless barrage of attacks. Rokash tried to counter, yet Leo avoided every blow before answering with strikes of his own. Rokash suddenly coughed in blood. He grabbed Rokash by the neck and hurled him into the air. Leo immediately followed him upward. An aerial attack. Rokash hesitated. He wondered why he had not activated his talent. Then another thought crossed his mind. He had completely frozen. Leo had flown around him in midair, attacking from his blind spots before blasting him away. As Rokash crashed back toward the ground, Leo followed with a powerful kick that slammed him into the floor. Breathing heavily, Leo admitted he was far too old to recover from a wound like this anymore. Leo had known his strength would fade with age. He had succeeded in leaving Rokash only seconds away from death. Even so, Leo vowed that before he died, Rokash would spend the rest of his life crippled. Leo charged forward with a crushing uppercut before gouging out one of Rokash's eyes. Rokash's men rushed over, shouting for him to get up because the building was already collapsing around them. As they dragged him away, Rokash screamed that the building would become Leo's grave. With his final breath, Leo called out Shay's name. Later, rain poured over Leo's funeral. The speaker welcomed everyone gathered to mourn the death of Leo Thomas. He honored Leo as a great man and explained that the small funeral had been Leo's own request. Leo had earned worldwide respect through his extraordinary abilities, even though he never acknowledged his own fame. But more than his strength, everyone remembered his kindness and compassion. To the world, Leo had been a symbol of power. To those who knew him, he was a man defined by love. After the service, Shay's classmates gathered around him. They told Shay they all knew Rokash was responsible. They wanted revenge, and sitting around grieving would accomplish nothing. One of them revealed that Rokash was hosting a tournament the following month to celebrate his place among the world's strongest Kimios. The tournament's champion would earn the right to face Rokash one-on-one. They wanted Shay to represent Red Ember Gym. Each dojo could only enter 2 fighters. Shay questioned the decision. He was the only member of the dojo without a talent and couldn't understand why they would choose him. His classmates reminded him that being human had never held him back. Master Leo had always considered Shay the brightest fighter among them when it came to pure combat. They also promised he would not be fighting alone. Shay accepted. Once everyone agreed that Rokash was their target, he asked one question. When do they start? 4 months later, Shay and Tevin arrived at the Rokash Enterprise Combat Stadium. The massive arena was packed with spectators eager to watch the tournament. One of the staff directed them to their changing room and told them all they had to do was sign the registry before competing. The opening matches featured some of the tournament's biggest names to draw in viewers. Tevin would fight first. Shay would follow. Before the event began, an introduction played for the tournament's host, Rokash Rampersad. At 61 years old, Rokash had become one of Trinidad and Tobago's most famous Kimios. Ranked 97th among the world's strongest documented Kimios, he had built an impressive career with 47 wins and only 3 losses in MMA. Outside the cage, he owned the Rampersad Tower, had several professional racing endorsements, and ran his own clothing brand. Aside from a controversial police incident years ago, he had built both wealth and fame. The broadcast also offered condolences for the death of Leo Thomas, Rokash's former teacher and a celebrated war hero. Listening to the broadcast, Shay's group could only grit their teeth, knowing Rokash himself had been responsible for Leo's death. The announcer continued, explaining how Kimios had transformed martial arts competitions and how Rokash's tournament gave rising fighters a chance to prove themselves. He quoted Rokash's philosophy that true power could never be faked and that the difference between ordinary and extraordinary strength was written in blood. The commentator even remarked that Rokash's newest scar made him look even more intimidating than before. Shay had heard enough. They were here to fight. Before heading out, the group reviewed the plan. Survive the first round. This was a BC-rated tournament, where competitors were allowed to kill their opponents for an instant victory. Because Kimyo abilities were often too dangerous to regulate, fatal injuries were considered part of the competition. Tevin joked that Master Leo would have killed them himself if he knew they had entered a tournament like this. He also admitted he had forgotten to tell his girlfriend that the event was BC-rated before heading toward the arena. The announcer introduced the fourth match of the night. Representing the East was Tevin. His opponent was Sunraz, known as the Untouched, a Kimyo famous for his incredible speed. Throughout his entire MMA career, nobody had ever managed to injure him. The matchup was introduced as a battle between an immovable tank and an untouchable speedster. Before the fight started, Tevin casually introduced himself, saying he had heard Sunraz was one of the fastest Kimyos around. Since Tevin was one of the toughest, he suggested they keep things friendly. Before he could finish, Rokash quietly gave Sunraz a single command: leave no one capable of touching him. The fight began instantly. Sunraz activated his talent. Shay immediately recognized it. By moving at extreme speeds, Sunraz generated a vortex that allowed his afterimages to materialize into temporary duplicates, making it nearly impossible to tell which one was real. Shay shouted for Tevin to keep his guard up, reminding him that he was built like a tank. Tevin tried, but the attacks came too fast. Refusing to go down, Tevin activated his own talent. High Forge. The ability allowed him to create a durable shell around his body that served as both an offensive and defensive weapon. As soon as the fight resumed, Sunraz rushed Tevin. Tevin activated his talent just before the attack landed, surrounding himself with a hardened shell. He threw a punch, but Sunraz effortlessly ducked underneath it. Confused, Sunraz questioned what kind of talent Tevin possessed. The commentator announced that Tevin had finally revealed his ability. Rhino Hide, a self-generated shell that encased the user in protective armor, greatly increasing durability while granting both defensive and offensive capabilities. Tevin grinned. The fight had finally begun. Rhino Hide made him much tougher, but it also made him heavier. There was no way he could match Sunraz's speed. His only chance was to wear him down. Sunraz sprinted forward and drove a knee into Tevin's face. Tevin couldn't believe it. Even through the armor, the attacks were getting through. From outside the ring, Shay shouted for Tevin to stop taking so many hits and find Sunraz's weakness. He reminded him of one of Master Leo's lessons. Talents were like flames burning inside a person. They could either be nurtured or extinguished. Every flame had something that strengthened it and something that weakened it. Sometimes a talent's greatest strength, viewed from another angle, became its greatest weakness. That hidden weakness was known as a talent's blind spot. Sunraz began circling Tevin at incredible speed. Tevin struggled to keep up. He forced himself to think. Then he noticed it. The ground. Sunraz charged in again. Tevin welcomed him. At the last second, he slammed his foot into the arena floor, shattering it beneath them. The broken ground disrupted Sunraz's footing, sending him airborne with nowhere to run. Speed alone couldn't save him in midair. Power could. Tevin launched a devastating punch that sent Sunraz flying across the arena. Watching from ringside, Shay could only stare in disbelief. The commentator erupted, wondering if Tevin had just tested the limits of the arena's protective barrier. The punch had knocked Sunraz unconscious. Tevin smiled. That was payback for the cheap shot. After the fight, Tevin looked around for Shay and asked Louise where he had gone. She explained that Shay had gone to prepare for his own match. Unlike usual, he was completely serious. Their goal was to expose Rokash, but she feared what would happen when Shay finally came face to face with the man who had killed Master Leo. The commentator announced the next fight. Shay Hart versus Nanaki. The two had been paired based on their previous tournament performances. Both had built reputations representing their respective gyms. The commentator introduced Shay as the human fighter whose combat skill showed in every movement. His opponent was Nanaki, a mutant fighter whose gym competed exclusively in BC-rated tournaments. Nanaki looked at Shay with disgust. He had entered the tournament to showcase his talent to the world, only to be matched against a human with no talent. To him, it made no difference. He would kill Shay and move on to the next round. Shay and Nanaki stepped into the ring. Laughing, Nanaki questioned whether matching him against a human was supposed to be some kind of joke. Shay ignored the taunt and told him not to stand in his way. Watching from above, Rokash stared at Shay, thinking the young man looked familiar. The match began. Nanaki threw the opening punch. Shay redirected it with a light tap, ducked underneath, and fired a kick toward Nanaki's head. Nanaki raised his guard and blocked it. The commentator praised Shay's opening exchange. In the crowd, spectators began wondering what kind of fighter Nanaki really was. Some questioned whether he possessed a hidden talent, while others insisted they would find out soon enough. Nanaki urged Shay to bring the heat. He threw another kick, but Shay slipped underneath it and countered with an elbow. Nanaki blocked that as well. Laughing, Nanaki mocked Shay, saying he probably expected a better death than this. As they locked up, he boasted that he had killed more people than Shay had ever fought. He promised Shay would die like all the others, with fear written across his face. Shay broke free with a dropkick, creating some distance between them. Nanaki laughed, calling Shay prey before demanding they stop playing around and get serious. Shay replied that Nanaki was only getting in the way of his mission. The crowd couldn't believe how evenly matched the fight appeared to be. Others quickly dismissed the idea, arguing that no human could truly match a Kimio bred for war. According to them, deathmatches were Nanaki's natural environment, and it was only a matter of time before first blood was drawn. The two continued exchanging blows until Nanaki suddenly grabbed Shay by the throat. A slash tore through Shay's vest and across his thigh. Blood sprayed into the air. The commentator shouted that there was blood everywhere. Nanaki grinned, saying the fight had only just begun. Shay looked down at the wound in disbelief. The attack had pierced straight through his vest. It burned. From ringside, his teammates urged him to hold on. All he had to do was survive long enough to reach the next round. Shay reminded himself that Nanaki was standing between him and Rokash. Nanaki noticed Shay's surprise and continued battering him. Laughing as he wondered whether he should mount Shay's head on a spike or simply rip his heart out. The commentator could only shout that the fight had become absolute chaos. Nanaki continued slashing Shay, each strike drawing more blood. He told Shay that the more he bled, the less he would be able to breathe. Watching from the sidelines, Louise and the others began to panic. Tevin shouted for Shay to wake up and find Nanaki's blind spot before it was too late. One of the spectators laughed at Tevin's concern and told him not to waste his breath. The hunting grounds were about to begin. Confused, Shay's teammates asked what he meant. A supporter of Nanaki explained that once Nanaki drew first blood during a hunt, the battle was already over. As his opponent's blood spilled, his instincts overflowed. Shay's teammates desperately begged for the fight to be stopped. They were too late. The crowd watched as Nanaki entered his blood-frenzied hunter state. Shay couldn't believe what he was seeing. Even the commentator began wondering if anyone else was concerned for the human fighter. Louise realized the truth. Nanaki was a state talent user. Normally, the weakness of his talent was a lack of blood. But the arena floor was already soaked with blood from the previous matches. That explained why Nanaki had resembled a shark from the very beginning. He had entered the fight already surrounded by everything his talent needed. Nanaki leapt high into the air. Shay stepped forward and, the moment Nanaki landed, drove a powerful upper right into his face. Nanaki only smiled. State talents were among the rarest abilities. They allowed their users to enter special states that granted entirely new attributes. Calling Shay nothing more than prey, Nanaki slammed a right hook into his face, knocking him to the ground. Laughing, Nanaki claimed he could smell blood everywhere. Kimio blood, human blood. It only made him stronger. Shay tried to counter with his left but missed. Instead, he slipped behind Nanaki, wrapped his arms around his waist, and launched him with a devastating suplex that shattered the arena floor. The entire stadium fell silent. Watching from his private room, Rokash wondered what Shay would do now. Nanaki grabbed Shay by the head and lifted him just enough for everyone to see that he was barely conscious. He shouted that this broken body was the result of years of human delusion. According to Nanaki, fighters like Shay only mock true strength. He declared that Shay's blood would be on everyone else's hands and vowed to kill every human arrogant enough to enter Kimyo tournaments. With another crushing punch, he sent Shay flying across the arena. Nanaki repeated Rokash's philosophy. Power could not be faked. Those who possessed it stood above everyone else. And the line between mediocrity and true power was written in the blood of those who ignored the absolute gap between them. Unable to watch any longer, Tevin screamed for the fight to be stopped. One of the spectators mocked him, telling him to watch his friend die. Nanaki listened to the silence inside the arena before promising to use Shay's corpse as a stepping stone. He even mocked his own mercy, saying he would grant Shay a swift death. Shay's teammates rushed to the arena gate, desperately demanding that the officials stop the fight. Nanaki ignored them. He decided Shay's head would decorate his wall as a trophy. As he prepared to charge, he remarked that Shay might have been related to a legend, but he was nothing more than a disappointment cursed to carry that name. Nanaki rushed forward. Just then, tiny sparks of flame began to appear around Shay. Lying on the arena floor, Shay wondered if this was where he would die. As his vision faded, he saw a man surrounded by flames walking toward him. The figure stopped directly in front of him. Shay refused to give up. He couldn't stop now. He closed his eyes. A moment later, the entire arena watched as Shay became engulfed in a massive sphere of flames. Louise screamed his name. The crowd stood frozen in disbelief. The commentator warned that the arena's protective barrier would not hold much longer. Azam immediately realized the spectators were in danger. Louise reacted first. Activating his talent, Chichioya no Hai, ash erupted from his back and formed a massive wall between the flames and the audience. The wall lasted only a moment before the flames blasted straight through it. As the fire surged toward the crowd, Azam used his incredible speed to pull a spectator out of harm's way just in time. Watching the chaos unfold, Tevin couldn't believe what he was seeing. Louise stared at the flames. They looked exactly like Master Leo's. At the center of the inferno, the flames spiraled around Shay, forming a massive vortex. Nanaki stared in disbelief. Furious, he accused Shay of lying. Shay had registered for the tournament as a human with no talent, yet he now stood surrounded by flames. Nanaki roared that Shay had mocked him from the very beginning. He swore he would devour him and tear him apart. Then he stopped. For the first time, Nanaki felt fear. Standing within the flames, Shay realized something was different. The pain was gone. Every wound across his body had healed. He questioned whether he was still alive and wondered what this mysterious power was. Nanaki refused to believe it. He shouted that Shay's blood had been completely human when they fought. Whatever trick this was, it changed nothing. He promised to kill Shay slowly. Nanaki charged straight at Shay. The moment he entered the flames, his body was consumed. Within seconds, he was burned to ashes. The entire arena fell silent. Watching in horror, Tevin's mind drifted back. Looking back now, he felt the warning signs had always been there, written in the blood Shay would eventually shed. But he had never realized where that path would lead. Shay was his brother, his closest friend, and this was the day he took his first step over the edge. Even years later, Tevin still wished he had done more to save him. Azam stared at the arena. Shay had killed him. Tevin remembered telling Shay that none of what had happened was his fault and that it was never his burden to carry. He never imagined that the same friend would one day become one of mankind's greatest enemies. As the flames around Shay faded, Tevin rushed to him. He asked if Shay was all right. Shay slowly got back to his feet. He could still stand, but his body felt as though it had been torn apart and stitched back together. Still shaken, Tevin asked since when they had become killers. Shay could only stare in silence. Suddenly, The windows of Rokash's private lounge exploded outward. The camera crew turned toward the noise. The commentator tried calming the crowd, believing Rokash had been involved in some sort of accident. Instead, Rokash burst into laughter. He recognized Shay, Leo's finest student. Then realization struck him. Leo had passed his talent on to Shay. Enraged, Shay warned Rokash never to speak his master's name again. Rokash laughed even harder. He remembered Shay from the Furious Wolf Club, standing beside Leo all those years ago. He couldn't believe Leo had chosen a weak human as his successor. Even in death, Leo had managed to leave behind someone to inherit his power. Rokash swore he would kill Shay just as he had killed Leo. The camera crews froze. Had Rokash just admitted to murdering the war hero Leo Thomas? His own servant buried his face in frustration. Rokash had just confessed on live television. Only then did Rokash notice every camera pointed directly at him. Moments later, police officers stormed into the arena. They couldn't believe the man who had hired them to secure the event was the very murderer they had been searching for. He had killed Leo Thomas, hosted a tournament to celebrate, and then hired the authorities to guard it. One of Rokash's men pointed out they couldn't attack the officers while the cameras were still rolling. The lead officer immediately placed Rokash Rampersad under arrest. Another officer ordered John Ellie Honore to step away from his boss. John Ellie refused, calmly telling everyone to stand behind him. The officers issued one final warning: step away from Rokash. Instead, John Ellie activated his talent. Blades erupted from his arms, intercepting the officers' gunfire. Before escaping, Rokash looked directly at Shay. He promised they would meet again. Even with Leo's power, Shay was still nothing. Shay answered without hesitation. He hoped the authorities found Rokash before Red Ember Jim did. Rokash had stolen the life of the man who raised them all. What made him think life could simply continue? He had made his final mistake. Shay told Rokash to run. If someone chose to kill a wolf, they had better make sure to kill its cubs as well. Otherwise, those cubs would hunt them to the grave. For months past, Rokash remained a fugitive, constantly fleeing from the authorities. His televised confession had exposed him to the entire world as the murderer of one of humanity's greatest heroes. Fear of Kimio's spread once again. Following the incident, governments reinforced the ban on using talents outside authorized venues. The laws had originally been created after the Kimio War so humans and Kimios could coexist peacefully, with only specially authorized service Kimios allowed to use their powers in public. Even so, public trust continued to collapse. Discrimination against Kimios increased. Vigilante attacks became more common. Businesses began refusing Kimio customers. And despite the worldwide manhunt, Rokash was still free. At a national press conference, Head Chancellor Abel Leggov warned that the future of Kimios now hung by a thread, and nobody knew what awaited them if society finally reached its breaking point. Elsewhere, a gray-haired woman carrying a large bag walked through the city. She had only one destination in mind. She needed